We open Talent Asset. After opening, we select the first node. Find Traits property. Add an ability trait. Set ability class to character jump. Then we set an input tag. Ability will be bound to the input tag. We set it to input jump. If you don't have this tag, add it. Click on the small triangle. Add subtag. It's called input jump. Profile select default gameplay tags. Click Add. Then we select it. Then select Activate on input. Now the skill can be activated through the bound input tag. Then go back to the character blueprint. Open your character blueprint. We're going to add the first component called the Ability System component. Then add an Ability Input component. The Ability Input component is from the Talent plugin. Select Ability Input. We need to add an input config, used to bind Talent node's input tag to an input action. Let's add an empty item first. Then go back to the Talent tutorial directory and create an input config. Right-click on the content browser. Select Miscellaneous Dataset. Then search for input config. Then confirm. The name is IC_custom input config. Open the created input config. Add an item under Ability Input Action. The input tag is the same as the node's input tag. Then bind the input action. You can use the jump action from third-person template. We can also create a new action. We find input action. Its name is IA_custom jump. Assign the input action to the property. Close input config first. Back to the character blueprint. Set input config to the newly created input config. Now input tag is bound to input action, but input action is not yet bound to user input. So we're going to add mapping context like here. We create an input mapping context. This is called IMC_custom. Then we open the input mapping context. Add the IA_custom jump created just now. Bind space button. Now we are going to use this input mapping context. We can copy the add mapping context node. Connect first. Then the mapping context here is the file just created. Then save it. Now some people may find this a bit confusing. Here is a picture to clarify the binding relationship between skills and inputs. First of all, the skill of the Talent node is bound to input tag. It is bound through the ability trait of the Talent node. Then input tag and input action are bound through ability input components input config. Input action and input mapping context are bound through the add mapping context node of the character. When there is user input will activate input action through the input mapping context first. Then activate the input tag according to the input action through the ability input component. Then activate the ability according to input tag. The overall logic is this. Back to the project, we need to turn off the jump feature of the original character. Only in this way can we know if the jump was triggered by the talent node. Now we run the game. Press T and click first node. Now you can jump by pressing space. If you press the right mouse button to deactivate the skill, then press space again and we won't be able to jump. Indicates that this node's ability is valid.